Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review, and it's actually of one of my favorite fragrance genres of all time. So this is actually a very, very tough review for me because there are many folks who think that Roja Dove stole Guerlain's cookbook, ran out the door, and created his own versions and is selling them for 10 times the price. I'm not saying that, so don't sue me, Roja Dove. I'm just saying there is chatter online that that is what happened, okay? That Roja is kind of a clone house. And some of it I agree with, some of it I don't agree with. And that's one of the reasons this makes this such a tough review, is I've reviewed many of Roja's works on the channel. This is one of the ones that I have not reviewed yet, and this is called Danger pour Homme Parfum. Now, I'm going to do a fresh couple squirts here, because I actually really like this fragrance, and I want to have a fresh opening for you guys for the review. So while that settles down, so the reason that this is kind of the, I would say, toughest review for me to do, and the reason I've waited, I've worn this 7 times in the last 3 years since I've had this bottle, and that may not seem like a lot, but with a collection this size, it is. 7 times, that's a lot of times for me to wear, and you can see the dent that I've put in the bottle, okay? So I've got a 6-hour dry down right here, and just a fresh spray that I did right now. So here's the thing about Danger. Danger came out in 2012. It was originally released in an Eau de Parfum. They discontinued the Eau de Parfum, and they now currently make it in the Parfum version. 50 mils is $500 for this bottle. Now, I did not pay that for this, but that's what it is, and but I did pay my own money for this. This was not a gift. I am not on the Roja free bottle brigade, okay? But the reason that this is the toughest review for me is that this fragrance is the closest, I think, to one of my favorite Guerlains of all time. Actually, I think it is my favorite Guerlain masculine of all time, and that is Heritage. I prefer the vintage Eau de Toilette, although the modern Eau de Parfum is still quite nice. Heritage is a very complex fragrance, but in a nutshell, Jean-Paul Guerlain had the idea to create sort of a flagship masculine fragrance for men for the brand that looked back at the history of Guerlain, and not just masculine Guerlain. So there is some bits and pieces in here which you'll associate with masculine Guerlains from the past, like, for example, the lemon in here, Abbey Rouge, the carnation in here, Abbey Rouge, but there's also feminine touches in here, or fragrances that were marketed towards women, right? And so, for example, you'll notice the vanilla and the bergamot on the top will give you sort of reminiscence of Shalimar. You'll pick up Jiki from that sort of lavender note in here, and it also gives you sort of indications of the future as well. So this is supposed to be a bottle that represents Foucault's pendulum, right? And I'll do a separate review of this fragrance. This will get a Hall of Fame review. But it's not just the past Guerlains. This is also a fragrance that swings the other way and represents future Guerlains to come, because the patchouli in here gives this sort of this outline of what was to come with L'Instant de Guerlain by Béatrice Piquet, right? While Jean-Paul Guerlain was kind of working in the background. So a Hall of Fame fragrance, one of my favorite top 10 masculine fragrance of all time for me personally, and this is the closest fragrance I've ever smelled to Heritage, personally. Danger by Roja. Roja used to work for Guerlain for 20-something years, so it makes sense that his fragrances are heavily inspired by Guerlain's, but I wouldn't call this a clone necessarily. I would say it's very heavily inspired by it. So let me read you the copy according to the brand, and then we'll talk. I'll give you my 2 cents on it, okay? So the brand says, "Danger, you have been warned." That's the little tagline. I'll put that in the headline title of the video. It says, "This creation doesn't hide how seductive it is. It announces it and refuses to apologize. A huge aromatic punch of lavender and tarragon alongside a pinch of spicy clove and cumin for extra invigoration announce Danger as a truly arresting scent before the creamy tones of jasmine melt into a mouth-watering vanilla and tonka bean to create a truly indulgent smoothness, which is counterpointed by a sharp zing of rhubarb and citrus. The glaringly addictive wet earth aspect of patchouli finds a perfect pairing with a huge note of cedarwood, which represents a confident strength of character, a man who knows the effect of his seductive prowess, thanks to an animalic dosing of ambergris and musk." So, okay, so that is the quick little blurb according to the brand. Roja's quote says, "Danger, Dangerous not just for those wearing it, but for those who smell it on them. Aromatic lemon, lavender, and tarragon create a fresh and willing invitation, but beware, as sensual aphrodisiacs lurk in the shadows, daring you to breathe it in a little deeper. The sweetness of vanilla and jasmine contrast against the dry, earthy, warm, and cedarwood and patchouli, tempting you to lean in a little closer and succumb. Just remember, you have been warned. Okay, so that's the copy from the brand. So here's the thing. This is extremely, extremely close to Heritage, but there are differences. So I'm going to try to just review Danger in and of itself, but I have to kind of go back to Heritage. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. Let's try that again, Ramsey. To talk about Danger without talking about Heritage. If you have any experience with the past, you will pick up Heritage and Danger almost instantly. Okay, almost instantly. And so here's the thing. Here's kind of what Roja has done. So the first thing is Danger opens up with a much fresher take. And the freshness of Danger is kind of unmatched by Heritage. Heritage does a little different opening. What ends up happening is there's a brilliant quote from AC by the channel Smells Good. He says that the opening of Danger is like walking through an olive orchid. And so it's got that, you know, Tuscany Mediterranean coast. And you know what's interesting is he's spot on about the freshness, but I don't get like olive trees. What actually it reminded me of is almost like olive oil. Like think about extra virgin olive oil, right? And the reason that comes to mind is in the Arabic culture, it's common to have breakfast with Arabic bread, olive oil, and what they call basically zayt and za'atar. So zayt and za'atar is like they put olive oil in a bowl, they put za'atar in a bowl, and the za'atar is sort of like a blend of sesame seeds, pine nuts, sumac, salt, herbs, that kind of thing. And you dip it in the oil, and then you dip it in the in the spices, and then you eat the bread, right? But imagine like the freshness, the consistency of that olive oil. And it feels like you're eating this breakfast under the Mediterranean sun, right? It really does. There's a very invigorating and a huge dose of lemon in the opening here. Much bigger dose of lemon than what you get in Heritage. Heritage, you get a bigger dose of that sort of fizzy bergamot from Shalimar, right? Here you get a big blast of lemon. And this sunny image comes to mind. I mean, it almost feels like you're outside, and it's almost like it's so bright that you're trying to look at the sun, but you're being blinded, right? Like, you know, you have to almost shield your eyes. You have to squint because it's just so bright. But it's a beautiful day, right? That's the feeling of the opening. And it's slightly green because of the tarragon, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But it is a beautiful opening. And the opening is different. The opening grabs you a little bit compared to Heritage. The longer that these fragrances stay on your skin, the closer and closer they come together, right? So as this fragrance dries down, it gets closer and closer to the dry down of Heritage. But the openings are a little bit different. But even from the word go, the second the molecules hit your skin, you will get Heritage in the background. I mean, it's standing in the wings like an Avenger, right? I mean, Heritage is there. It's impossible to smell this. If you have any experience with Heritage, to smell this and not smell Heritage inside of Danger. So there's no getting around that. Anyone that has any sort of idea of the past has to make reference of that, has to make note of that. So Heritage has a little bit more of that sort of fizzy metallic bergamot, right? Much more similar to Shalimar. And here it feels like the bergamot really defers to the lemon. And the lemon is so fresh and realistic. I mean, it's a photogenic lemon. It is like, just imagine yourself sitting at a breakfast being waited on by a very helpful wait staff. The view, because you're on a mountain resort overlooking a beautiful, you know, countryside or whatever it is. And just imagine sort of they give you these lemons and you take the knife and you literally pick the seeds out of the lemons, right? That's the freshness of the lemon in here. And so along with that, you basically get this lavender, right? And the lavender is going to give you a slight creamy element, but it's going to give you a little bit of a barbershop feel, okay? So that barbershop element comes through. It shines through, right? There's no getting around it. the barbershop elements here of the lavender. You get little tiny hints of maybe shaving foam in the background, but the lavender gives it a slightly old school feel, slightly grown up feel, right? This is a executive scent for me. This is a CEO scent. This is a C-suite scent, whatever you want to call it. This is very similar to what I said about the things in my Vintage Hall of Fame review on Hugo Boss #1. This does something very similar. You know, I could totally see somebody who is high up on the food chain at a company wearing a scent like this. You know, this is sort of one of those high flyer scents, right? Someone that wants to conquer the world, right? It has that feel about it, but there's also maturity to it. This is not a boy scent. Somebody that that knows how to carry himself, someone that knows the history would wear something like this, right? And along with that slight barbershop sort of lavender, you're going to get one of my top secret, not top secret, but one of the notes that gives off like a, anytime I see this note in a note listing, I think I'm going to like the scent profile. And that is tarragon. Tarragon for me is almost like a little bit of a secret weapon. And if you know vintage, if you know vintage perfumery, especially vintage masculine perfumery, okay, you'll be familiar with tarragon. And tarragon is one of my favorite herbs ever to be used in perfumery. Anytime I see it, it's kind of one of those good omens, right? It's like, okay, this is going to be a scent that's going to be right up my alley. And here, the tarragon is front and center. I mean, when you first spray, you're going to get it. That tarragon, lemon, bergamot thing plays off of the lavender beautifully. And the tarragon, basically, if you know vintage perfumery, you're probably very familiar with it. Like, for example, if you watch my Vintage Hall of Fame review on YSL Jazz, that has tarragon. Aigner Super Fragrance has tarragon. Boss #1. All three of those have a Vintage Hall of Fame review on my channel that you can check out. And so for me, tarragon is, like I said, a little bit of a check mark. Anytime I see that tarragon, I'm like, okay, this is going to be more up my alley. There's also other vintage scents that use tarragon, which will be getting a Hall of Fame review on my channel. For example, if you know Caron's Yatagan, if you know Koros, if you know Jules by Christian Dior, if you know Lapidus pour Homme, tarragon is in all of these. Bandit, Etros Goma, one of my favorite leathers that no one talks about. Sar by Van Cleef & Arpels, beautiful tarragon in all of those, right? So, big player in masculine perfumery. And my horns go straight when I see tarragon, okay? It is a bitter, pungent, sort of very sharp smell. You know, it really, it's a sharp anise-like smell is really the best way to describe it, but a greener take on anise, right? So it kind of contains this ingredient called methyl chavicol, and it's basically a material that gives off this plant green take on a licorice. So imagine like a green planty smelling licorice. That's how tarragon smells to me. Some people say it could even add dill facets, which I could totally see. Some people say dried oregano, but it's definitely in that ballpark, okay? And along with that very brilliant opening, 5-star, brilliant opening, is that Heritage DNA lurking in the background, okay? Like an Avenger, just standing over danger, looking down on it, like casting the long shadow, right? Heritage is just like casting its shadow over danger. It's impossible to get away from it. And it's there in the background. The instant you spray, you'll get Heritage. But in usual Roja fashion, right? In usual Roja fashion, he tries to Roja it up, is the way that I've been saying it. There's no other way to say it. That's basically what he does. He tries to take these vintage DNAs and Roja them up, amplify them, or change some things here and there, and modernize the formula, if you will, right? And so there's a couple things that will make an appearance that you will not find in Heritage. Probably the most scent-changing note in this, to me, is cumin, all right? So what he's done is he's added a cumin note that is going to make an appearance probably about 10 to 15 minutes in. And along with that cumin comes a bit of an animalic note, okay? And that animalic note, I don't know what it is. In Parfumo, there's no animalic note listed. Although if I had, well, there is, that's not true. There's an ambergris note listed. So it may be like a mixture of ambergris and castoreum, or ambergris and civet. I would guess it's probably castoreum, but I honestly don't know. But definitely ambergris is one of the animalic notes. But I think the note that changes the structure the most for Danger is that cumin, okay? Because the cumin note, and he mentions clove as well, so it's true. Cumin and clove kind of play off of each other to add this sort of spiciness. You know, cumin can be associated with sweatiness. There is a little bit of that sometimes, but you really have to kind of wrap your head around the fact that he is using cumin here in a sense, not like a vintage scent, not like it's not like smelling Fate Man by Amouage, where there's a huge amount of cumin, or some of the big cumin bombs from the past. Doesn't go that route at all. In fact, I think the cumin here is very well blended. You'll definitely get it, but it's not like jumping. It's not jarring. It's not in your face to the point where you're going to be like, oh, cumin. No, I'm completely out, because that barbershop element of the lavender and everything else, especially the beautiful patchouli, is already coming through, okay? And the patchouli here is not scratchy. I think I read in his little breakdown, he says that that the patchouli is, what did I see? I thought I saw him say wet earth aspects of patchouli. And yes, there is a little bit of that, but it's not a deep earthy. It's not like Kritzia Moods Uomo old school patchouli. There's some modern elements to this composition through and through. There's some vintage elements, but there's also some modern elements, if that makes sense, okay? And along with that cumin, and actually the cumin, I should mention, the cumin is probably the closest to the cumin used in Diaghilev, if that makes sense, okay? So Diaghilev is a Roja creation that I think is his greatest creation of all time. I've reviewed it on the channel. You can check that out. Many people compare it to Mitsuko. I think it's more like Mitsuko meets Rochas Femme, meets Aramis meets Azure by Estee Lauder, meets Bandit, you know, all of these different things, meets Jean-Charles de Castelbajac #2. I mean, it's just like a blend of all of these very famous vintage Chypre perfumes, but the dirtiness, the sexualized aspect of Diaghilev is enhanced by the cumin. So, but that style of cumin is used here, but it's toned down, if that makes sense. So the closest cumin note I've ever smelled to the cumin in Danger pour Homme Parfum would be the cumin note in Diaghilev. That's just my personal opinion, okay? But it seems like it's toned down a little bit. Not as jarring, not as in your face, because what ends up happening is that cumin note is almost intertwined with some of the other notes. So it's like woven in to the fabric of the note breakdown. And so what happens is that along with that cumin, you're going to get a couple things come to your nose as well. Number one is going to be floral notes. Two in particular. One is Lily of the Valley. Roja loves Lily of the Valley. He also loves violet. Okay, so those two notes come forward. And the Lily of the Valley is sort of very soft and powdery and gentle, almost like you're smelling talcum powder, right? Or if you play pool, you know how you put your hand on the chalk so that the cue glides easier on your hand. There's a little bit of that chalky aspect to it as well, but mostly talcum powder and powders and baby powders and stuff like that, and white floral, okay? And with that is they have reduced the aldehyde. So when you look at the opening of Heritage, there's a big old school aldehydic opening that hits you. The aldehydes are removed. So they kind of, again, they're modernizing. Roja is modernizing this scent DNA is what he's trying to do. And then along with the Lily of the Valley, you're going to get that violet. And violet is one of Roja's favorite floral notes. It's also one of his favorite colors. If you ever see how he dresses, he loves dressing in flamboyant violet colored suits. Because even if you go back to ancient Rome, violet was sort of the color of rulers. It was the color of emperors. They called it Tyrian purple back in the day because it was so hard to find. There was a specific sea snail that they had to get thousands and thousands of them to create like even one drop of purple. So a guy who had like a purple cloak or something, you know, he was extremely rich from back in the day. And if you look at Roja's dress, it really harkens back to that, right? So he's a great marketer. He really is. Say what you want about Roja, his marketing and sort of his understanding of symbols are fantastic. I think that's sort of one of his strongest points. And so Tyrian Purple Violet, think about the violety color of some of those suits that he wears. If you've ever seen his interviews on YouTube, there's this very soft, powdery, sort of very tender violet. It's like a candied Parma violet. It adds a little bit of sweetness, but it does add this purple feel, right? So this purple feel is there. And finally, along with that floral accord, I'm trying to recreate for you guys, which is not easy, but it's very hard because this is a very well blended scent. But along with that floral accord, you're going to get the cumin mixing in with it, being intertwined with it. And that's where the animalics and this very fleshy rhubarb start to come to the forefront. And the rhubarb here is sort of almost like a berried rhubarb in a sense, but it's almost like it takes you through an arc of colors, right? So the rhubarb sometimes blends with that velvety purple violet color that I was mentioning earlier. Think about the velvety sort of feeling of some of those suits Roja wears, which are outlandish, outrageous, whatever you want to call it. And imagine this sort of berried rhubarb that goes from sour to sweet and almost goes from like green to fruity, right? Like you've ever seen a rhubarb whole, right? There are green aspects to it, and then there are red aspects to it. It literally changes colors itself if you've seen a whole thing of rhubarb. And that's kind of a big change to Danger because there is no rhubarb in the OG Heritage, right? It's not there. There is no rhubarb. That's an extra addition that Roja made on top of the DNA. And he also made another removal. So I mentioned previously that the aldehydes were removed. The other removal is the old school carnation, okay? So carnation is a note that is also really associated with many vintage masculine fragrances. And it's one of my favorite flowers. I love the old school carnation that you find in some of the vintage masculines that are now pretty much no more. And I'll try to review many of those as time goes on, but removing that carnation note is another one of the additions that he made to this DNA. And so you can see what he's trying to do. He's trying to modernize it. He's trying to make it fresher. He also removed the amber and added ambergris, right? So kind of like a Creed play there, because Creed loved taking a DNA and absolutely loved taking it and just using the highest quality materials and issuing a scent that way. They did it between Paco Rabanne XS and Creed Himalaya. And so this is kind of the style that Roja is taking here. Yes, there are some additions. I wouldn't necessarily call it a clone because it's not an out and out clone because of the things that he added and removed. And it's kind of, even though it technically is its own scent, it's so unbelievably close to Heritage that, you know, people are going to say, why should I pay $500 when I can get this for $60, right? Or, well, you can't get the vintage for $60, but you get the idea, right? And as it dries down, I think the patchouli is not as prominent here, although it's definitely part of the scent makeup. The patchouli in vintage Heritage is one of my favorite patchoulis of all time. Here you still get it, like Roja said on his little breakdown, there is a little bit of the earthiness, but it's not the vintage old school scratchy. It's almost like they use the molecular distillation to pull some of those features out and amp up some of the other notes. The woodiness here, of cedar is definitely prominent. The oak moss is there. There's some vetiver, which will give you a little bit of that forest floor feel as it continues to dry down. It is technically a spicy, woody fragrance. There's a little bit of vanilla, but it's not going to be, you know, super sweet or anything like that. It just adds a tiny touch of sweetness. I think the vanilla actually plays pretty well with the sweetness of the violet, of that purple violet flower. And of course, jasmine from Grasse. That's a very important ingredient here. And so you can kind of see what he's done, right? Taken the DNA, tried to modernize it, put it in a fancy bottle, sell it for 10 times the price or whatever it is. Is it worth it? I don't know. I mean, I think that is going to be a personal choice for everybody, because even though this may be 90% similar, let's say, right? Is that extra 10% worth 10 times the price? And that's the personal question you have to ask yourself. If you love this scent DNA, like for me, this is one of my favorite scent DNAs of all time. And actually, there's a very, very interesting article on Fragrantica about Zeno by the House of Davidoff. And I think Zeno was one of the first ones to kind of have this more modernized DNA. I guess technically you could take this Amber Fougere DNA all the way back to something like Pierre Cardin's Pour Monsieur. And then also there is a fragrance by the House of Cerruti called Fair Play. Those are earlier incarnations of this, right? And then after Fair Play, it basically goes into Zeno. And Zeno is kind of the first real modern interpretation of this Amber Fougere. What's very interesting about Zeno is that Zeno used vanilla in the base. And the vanilla was, Michel Almerac publicly states that Shalimar was the sort of inspiration for the base of Zeno, right? And so you have a Guerlain fragrance that smells like a vintage, older Davidoff fragrance. And then there were more fragrances that came after. Etienne Aigner came out with one, and it was called, what was it called? Sorry, I can't find it now. Why can't I find it? Where are you? Where are you hiding? Ah, there you are. It was called Free Life, sorry. It was called Free Life by Etienne Aigner. This came out 1 year after Zeno. And then after this, there were a couple others that came after, I forget, but I know Escada Pour Homme came after Heritage. So this scent profile was like it was a big deal. Ungaro Pour L'Homme 1, I think that might have came out right around Heritage. So there have been a couple, right? And so it's interesting because it's very hard for me to sort of dock points too much from the Roja when really, even though I think this is the standout of the brand, like of the style of this Amber Fougere style. I think if you said Ramsey pick one, I would pick Heritage. I think this is the best, but this also came after others. Many people don't realize Zeno, Free Life. I think there was even a couple other ones in there that I'm forgetting, but Ungaro Pour L'Homme, the first one, and then this came out. And so, but it is interesting how it all comes full circle, just like kind of the pendulum, it swings back the other way. A vintage Guerlain inspired Zeno from Davidoff, and then Guerlain ended up coming back and making the best version of this. And then later on, Roja created his version. So it's kind of a crazy circle, right? But if you love this scent DNA, I do think that these are two of the better ones that do it. I love the vintage versions as well, but these two are really something special. But I'll review Free Life, I'll review Zeno, I'll review Ungaro Pour L'Homme 1 and Escada Pour Homme. I have a comparison video on the channel versus the EDT and the EDP. So it's a scent profile that I pay a lot of attention to. I've done a lot of work on sort of this scent profile, but danger for me, what Roja has added, the Tarragon, which I think is another addition. I don't think original Heritage had Tarragon. So, but it does remove some things. It removes the juniper berries, the clary sage. There's all these other things that it removes. The balsam firs, and he kind of just does it in his own way, and makes some of the additions: the tarragon, the cumin, the ambergris. I think there is a violet note in Heritage. And so he kind of he's removed the carnation, removed the aldehydes, but it still gives you that scent association instantly with Guerlain. And since he worked for Guerlain, and since so many of his fragrances remind you of older Guerlains, for example, Diaghilev and Mitsuko, or his version of Vetiver and Guerlain's Vetiver, and there's many others as well, and many other examples as well. But since there is that association with Guerlain, it's impossible to overlook that. I think if you walked up to the counter as a newbie, like if I walked up to the counter and I had zero experience with Guerlain, and I smelled this, it would be very easy for me to go, wow, this is the best fragrance of all time. I mean, like for me, for my scent, my personal choice of scent, something like this, it checks every single box. I love this scent DNA. But because I know about the history, there's a part of me that is very skeptical. You know, it looks at them, you know, with a little bit of a crooked eye. You know what I mean? Like $500 for 50 mils. And the other thing is, this doesn't wear like a pure parfum. It wears more like an eau de parfum. You know, the spray from 6-7 hours ago is already deep into the dry down. You know, a very skin scent. You know, there are many, you know, mind you, there are many pure parfums or extraits that that last for 20 hours on your skin. And these don't act like pure parfums on my skin. They wear much lighter, like it's been lightened up, like it's been cut with water over the years. Maybe the very early versions of the parfum did, but these do not wear that way on my skin. So that's the other thing to mention. You're paying a lot for a fragrance that wears like an eau de parfum. And that's why they put out the cologne, parfum colognes, or whatever they call them. And the parfum colognes are less money. I think that they're good value for money. I have a little decant of the Parfum cologne, and it's okay. I mean, would I buy this again? No, I wouldn't. As much as I enjoy it, I would just wear my Heritage or some of these vintage versions of this scent profile, if you will. But yes, I mean, that's kind of my take. I love what it dries down to. I love the patchouli, and in Danger, you know, there's a beautiful cedar note instead of that old school Guerlain sandalwood. That's a difference as well that I forgot to highlight. So, you know, Danger, it may have some sandalwoody notes, but it doesn't come anywhere near the smooth, amazing sandalwood in the vintage Heritage. So there are pros and cons to both. For me, nothing will overcome this. This is a legend, a classic, but because it has all of these old Guerlains in it, this is going to remind you of some of those old Guerlain fragrances as well. And so very hard to review, very hard to review this type of perfumery, and very hard to say, is it a fair price? You know, is 50 mils for $500 fair? It seems extremely exorbitant, although that's what they're going for. They're going for the crowd that could buy 2 bottles of this, 3 bottles of this at a time, and not bat an eye. They won't even notice it on their credit card statement. They'll pay it and move on. That's the crowd they're going for, right? Dropping $1,000 or $2,000 on a perfume means nothing to them. And they have hit the nail on the head for that. I mean, they really have. It smells posh. It smells expensive. That opening with that bright lemon, that beautiful olive oil-like lemon is beautiful. There's also some leathery notes in Danger that I don't think you get in Heritage. Heritage goes more towards the forest floor aspect. I guess this actually did turn into like a comparison video because it's just so impossible to talk about Danger without talking about Heritage. But in a nutshell, do I like this fragrance? Yes, absolutely. I really do. I like this fragrance a lot. I love wearing it. Every time I wear it, it puts me in a good mood. It's Christmas Eve and I'm wearing this as my scent of the day and I'm reviewing it for you guys. So anyways, Merry Christmas to everyone. If you have experience with Danger, do let me know what your thoughts are. Love to hear your thoughts. Love the feedback and the back and forth in the comment section. So everyone have a Merry Christmas or winter solstice if you prefer. So cheers guys. Thanks for watching and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.